In this video, I'm going to give you my top 10 mixing tips that literally changed everything for me, allowing me to become a full-time music producer, have tracks on over 100 million streams, and travel the world to DJ. And by the way, stick around to the last one because it's my ultimate mixing tip. Let's dive in. Okay, here we go. Tip number one is don't cut the low end from everything. So a popular misconception that I've seen come from YouTube and that has passed on to a lot of my students when they first come to me is that you need to cut the low end from everything except the kick and bass. Now this leads to a mix that sounds thin. Now I personally think this misconception comes from miscommunication. You definitely should cut the low end from everything except the kick and bass in the drop, not in every part of the track. Take this piano for example. You see how much information is going on around here? Now if I was to turn this on to where people usually tell you to cut around the 100 mark, just listen to the low end, and I'm going to turn it on and off and just listen to what's happening. I mean, we're completely missing out this guy here, and that's taking up a lot of space and giving us a lot of warmth. And again, we've lost that second chord as well. So now I'm not saying that everything should have low end in. When it comes to making a track, really think about what like your main instruments are and are they full? Because when you bring in like a piano and some strings or like a guitar, you don't want them all to have low end in, but something should definitely have low end in. Like you shouldn't cut it out of everything is the point here. Cool. This next tip is building your drop from low to high frequencies. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this. You get to the drop and it makes most sense to start with like the chords, leads, get a melody in there, etc. And I did this for a long time. And what I found was by the time it come to getting bass and drums in the track, there just wasn't enough room left because I'd layered up like 7 different layers of chords. So I've started creating drops differently in the past few years and it's helped me out massively. You start with drums, and then bass. I call this the foundational layer, which you can then lay upon with chords, leads, and all that kind of nice top end stuff, but you've got to get this part right first. And what I found interesting was that doing it this way, when it got to the chords, I didn't need as many layers. Everyone seems to be so focused on adding all the saws in, when in reality, I'm going to show you now that you don't need that many. Listen to how full this sounds with just the drums and bass. Now let's add in the chords. As you can see, the chords aren't even taking up that much room. I'll go through them one by one. But here's the thing, right? Let me take the bass out. You can really tell that the bass is really driving the track now. The key with mixing drops is that you want it all to sound as one. The high-end frequencies from the bass actually sound like they're part of the saws. Like it all comes together as one big thing. So always think big picture. Let me add in the rest of the stuff. My next tip is using sends for reverbs. Now I use reverbs on send and returns for my vocals for a few reasons. Number one is I can keep the vocal clean whilst adding reverb. Usually when you slap a reverb on the channel and you increase the mix, you start to lose the dry signal of the channel and then you have to do a lot of balancing to sort it out. And let me just show you what that looks like. I'll start it off low and the vocal will just start getting lost.
We forgot shadows, we've kept some secrets in the shades.
Yeah, so you can hear the higher we go up, the more we start to lose it. But if we use a send and return, watch what happens when I increase this.
We forgot shadows, we've kept some secrets in the shades of grey.
I haven't lost any original vocal. All I've done is add reverb on top of it, which is very ideal when it comes to mixing. Now, one of the main reasons that I do it this way is so that I can EQ the reverb of the vocal. This is something I do on every single track because in that kind of like low boomy range of the vocal, I don't want to cut it too much from the main vocal, but on the reverb, it just adds a lot of mud to the mix. I'll show you what I mean. What you can do is you can throw an EQ directly on the send, and the beauty of this is that it won't affect the original vocal whatsoever. You're just EQing the reverb.
We forgot shadow,
I'm going to boost this so you can hear what I'm saying.
We forgot shadow.
Now that's just mud, like we don't want that in the mix. That's going to sound very boomy and just very unclean. So what I usually do is give it a little bit of a dip.
We forgot shadows. We've kept some secrets.
That's way cleaner. Now another reason I like doing this is because in our tracks, I like to change the reverb levels for certain parts. So for instance, the verse might not have as much reverb as the chorus. I'll show you how I do that now. So the chorus starts here. So I might just automate the send to go from -13 to like -9 during that section.
Me. And if I showed you my phone.
And then I can simply just take it back down for the next verse. There's a bonus tip for you Ableton users. You can do something very, very similar on the actual channel. So if we was to drag a vintage verb onto the channel, right, same deal, right? You turn up the mix, you lose the sound. But if you group it and then open this little guy here and right click, create chain, this is now like a parallel processing. So we've got the dry signal and we've got just reverb. And the beauty of this, again, you can mix them. So I can bring in as much reverb as I want. Now with snares, again, I don't like to have too much of that like boominess. So I can drag an EQ right on top of this guy and we are just EQ and reverb again now. And that's a really good way of keeping your sounds clean, especially for those reverbs that don't have very good EQs. This next tip is all about not overdoing it with your instruments. If you have way too many instruments going on at one time, it's hard for the listener to figure out what they're actually listening to or what you want them to listen to, and it will just feel a bit chaotic. Instead, pick one strong instrument and everything else should be just layered around as support elements. So take this piano, for example. Okay, so you can hear that we've got a chord progression. We've actually got a bit of melody in there as well. Now what I see a lot of people doing is like layering up another instrument with it. For instance, like this guitar. You can hear now that even though it's got kind of like a nice quality to it, it's definitely lost. I don't know what I'm listening to. Like, am I listening to the piano? Am I listening to the guitar? Because they've both got melodies going on. My advice here would be make one of them the support layer, and I can show you two ways of doing that. So if we were going to make the guitar a support layer, we could add maybe a shimmer to it. We'll put the mix quite high, big stereo, feedback up. I'm actually going to keep this at 0. And then some low cut. And then I would EQ it as well. Just filter it in a little bit. And now I can hear the piano and the guitar's just kind of doing an atmospheric thing in the background. The other way to do it is if you wanted to keep the guitar and not the piano, you wanted the piano to be more background, remove the melody, like just get rid of these guys. And now it all fits together very nicely without being distracted on what you should be listening to. The next tip is sound selection. Sound selection is everything. Sometimes a great idea might get passed on just because you might have the wrong sounds, if that makes sense. Take this drop melody, for example. I can hear it's got some potential, but the sounds definitely aren't there. It's not the right lead sound. It's not the right like chord sound. We could take that with the exact same stuff and use the right sounds or sounds that suit it better at least and have something like this. which is way better, way fuller, the correct sounds in the correct places. So let's take a look at what was going wrong here. First of all, the drums, as you can see, were whack. There's actually nothing wrong with the drums themselves, they just need layering. Whereas these drums, punchy drums, way fuller. Okay, next we've got bass. It's got that like whippy attack, like that vowel-y thing going on, which doesn't really help with this style of music. Whereas the bass here, way more solid and sustained. Chords, I believe I actually kept the chords the exact same. Yep, but we've just got different styles of sounds now. Way more detuned, way more crunchy, and then we've got another layer here. That classic AU5 Super Saw Chaos, whatever it is, really fucking cool though. And that with that. And then the ARP that we had for the first bit, it doesn't have any characters that make it stand out, and definitely not going to cut through a mix properly. Whereas here we've got more of a square layer. It's got some decapitator on it, it's got some reverb on it. Let me take these off. Way better. And then we've got actually a really shitty sound, but I'm going to touch on that in a minute in the next tip. And then we've got Atmos. Mixing tip for atmospheres, make sure you cut them quite high because there's too much shit here. That is not going to go well with the, I'll just show you. Ew, put them back on. We only want the top end. I have no idea what this is. I think this is white noise. Yeah, so it's all about using the right sounds in the right frequency spectrums. It looks like here I've actually done it in like order of lowest to highest. Now, a way to ensure that you have high quality sounds is using an app like Splice, where there's literal artist packs on there so that you know they're high quality sounds because the artist has actually made them. Or you can sign up for the Sound Horizon Academy, where I've got tons of samples, presets and templates on the website that you can go through. The templates are great, by the way, because you can just dissect them and see how the sounds and layers kind of interact with each other. Right, this next tip is great. It's all about mixing in context. When it comes to drop melodies, one thing I often see from new students is their sounds have tons of character. Like they've got tons of like reverb, delays. They're just really characteristic. The problem with that though is it all builds up and it just gets very chaotic. Now my sounds in the drop are actually a lot more boring when soloed. I don't have any reverb or delays on like the saws or bass. In fact, I view this as a pyramid where at the bottom you've got low frequencies and at the top you've got high frequencies. And the higher we get, the more spatial effects that I allow. In other words, the higher range the sound, the more I allow reverb and delay. Now, if we're going the drop method of starting at low to high, then you should already have your chords in. Now, when you start doing your melody, I want you to like not be in solo mode. Sure, use solo mode to get the melody down, but once you come to choosing the sounds, solo the chords with it. You really want to hear how this harmonizes. You don't really care too much about how it sounds on its own because you're not going to hear it on its own. What matters is how it sounds with everything else. And a lot of the times, the ones that you actually choose by doing this method, when you listen in solo, you're like, I never would have chose this sound. For instance, when I was doing this sound selection drop, I landed on this ARP here. I never, like listening to that in solo, I never would choose that, but it goes really well with all this stuff. It doesn't matter how it sounds at the time because it's how it sounds in the mix. And as you noticed, I've got no reverb delay on this. And it's not the fact that I couldn't get away with it because it's a higher sound, it's just it doesn't need it. I've got some reverb and delay on this one. Another example is this lead. God damn, that sounds awful. But you put it with these guys. And it's just really pushing that note in the melody, and like it doesn't matter that it sucks because you don't hear it in its sucky form. Now this next tip is A/B testing, and we can stay on this project because this applies to this. A good way to know if you're making the right decision is to A/B test, and this is so simple but yet so effective. For example, like this drop lead, to really tell if it works or not, solo it with the elements that you need to hear it with. I usually go with the chords and bass, and simply when it's playing, just turn it off and turn it on, and the only question you need to ask is this making a good impact or a bad impact? Same with the ARP. Same with this ARP. Now this really helps because it tells you a few things. One, it tells you, does it A, work or not? And B, is it too loud, too quiet? For instance, I've already mixed this, but let's say this was about there. When it's playing, I might be like, sweet, sounds fine. But when I turn it off and then turn it back on, I can instantly hear it's too loud. And it's also good to take it the other way, turn it down even more. Now at minus 13.4, I can't even hear it. So A/Bing tells me that that needs to be louder. Now when I'm A/Bing, I can hear it when it's on, it's not too loud, but when I take it away, I can hear that it's gone. Honestly, this sounds like one of the most simple techniques ever, but I swear it's one of my favorite ways to really analyze whether my mixing is working or not. Now this next tip is what I call the decap verb method, and it's because I've got a rack with a decapitator and a reverb on it. But the trick is simple. You load on a few effects before you start auditioning sounds. Now a lot of the time you might brush past a particular sound because it sounds dry and you don't hear its full potential. However, I know how much difference like a bit of distortion and reverb can make, so I'll throw this on before I start auditioning so that I can maximize the chances of finding the right sound, and then I can just dial in on the amount of distortion and reverb once I've got a sound that's in the ballpark. So let me show you what I mean. So if I turn this off, so I found this sound, and like dry, no, I would not choose to use this. With a bit of decap and reverb on, all of a sudden it's a lot more pleasant to hear in the mix. And then we can just adjust stuff from there, like I can hear that I don't want that top end. If I take this off, just having some effects on preloaded makes all the difference in choosing better sounds. So the next tip is about not overcomplicating everything. Like there's no need to group everything and then pile tons of effects on that group if it's not needed. So this is something I've seen quite often in early lessons. These producers have learned somewhere along the way that like grouping your elements and piling like distortion, compression, all these kind of like effects that make stuff kind of glue together often has the opposite effect if they're not used correctly. For instance, a lot of my groups are just for organization. I try and dial in the sounds correctly first and then use the groups very, very minimally if I need to use some effects. Like maybe I'll just do some widening. The problem with putting like distortion on your group is the fact that everything then goes through that same distortion. Whereas you might only need distortion on one sound, but it's going through everything and then everything gets squashed and your mix just doesn't sound as big because everything's like lost a lot of energy. Like I've honestly spent entire lessons undoing this sort of stuff for students and then showing them the difference that it can make when you just get the individual sounds correct first rather than trying to fix it in the group. Now, my final and probably my most useful tip is to remake songs. In my opinion, this is the ultimate way to grow your skills as a producer. I did this for the first few years producing. I still do it now. It's taught me so much. It has everything from learning sound selection, volumes, balancing, effects, when to use them, when not to. It's basically a cheat for learning what goes into a professional song. So you basically pick your favorite track and you try and get it as close as possible. If it's the drop, you then start with drums, bass, go through it that method. Constantly be asking questions. Is the original kick bassier? Does the snare have more punch around the 200 hertz mark? Is there a white noise on the drop? Is there effects on the drop? Is there down sweeps? What kind of drums are they? Is that a ride I can hear? Is it a crash? All these questions will then allow you to take all of this knowledge and apply it to your own music. Here's a video that I did last week when I remade an Millennium and a 7 Lion song. It's a full video, so go ahead and watch it, see how you can do this for yourself. So I hope this video had tons of value for you. Some of these techniques are very simple, but I promise do not sleep on them. They are super effective in growing your mixing skills. I sat and thought long and hard about the 10 mixing skills that I use on a daily basis, and this is them. So I promise if you put these to good work, it will level up your music. If you did find value from this video, please drop me a like and subscribe. It will help me massively to grow the channel and reach more and more producers to help just like yourself. Peace.